somebody's pet. The ears are docked, the tail is docked. This was somebody's pet.
Every year, more than 3 million dogs are killed for the dog meat industry.
This whole cart is nothing but dead dogs.
I love my country, I love Korea, but dog eating culture makes me shameful. The way they kill dogs are too cruel.
They believe that the more torture, the stronger their Viagra.
When you've seen the dog being skinned alive, you can't ever get it out of your mind.
We are all former combat vets involved with canine operations where dogs had saved their lives.
It gets to the point where you need to take up action.
헌법소원을 해서라도 저는 끝까지 할 것입니다.
This is a war.
So that was the trailer from the highly anticipated film Dog War, which will be hopefully released soon. So many of you out there listening already are well aware of the film Dog War. It's the first feature film that will be exposing the dog meat farms in South Korea. And so with me today, I have Andy Abrahams-Wilson, who's the founder, president of Open Eye Pictures. So welcome on the show, Andy.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Just to be clear, Open Eye Pictures is the film production company behind the film Dog War. Obviously.
That's right.
Most people know that, but just want to make sure. So I'm sure everyone out there is as excited as I am to learn more about the film and how it's going and what stage of production we're at. But before we delve into that, I was wanting to get a little bit more of a personal idea of who you are, Andy, and where did you grow up, and did you always have pets? Did you love animals from the get-go?
Yeah, okay. Well, I grew up kind of all over the place. I was born in Ohio, moved to New Jersey when I was young, the metropolitan area of New York, and then moved to Tennessee from 8 to 16, where that was my formative years. Then went to college in Chicago at Northwestern University, where I started out studying journalism at the Medill School of Journalism. And then I switched to cultural anthropology. I realized I needed to go deeper into stories, not just scratch the surface. And hence, a film like Dog War, in which we've been doing this for about 2 years plus, going deep. And so that's what I'm interested in mostly, is going deeply into stories, investigative, and trying to understand as much as possible behind what's apparent. And speaking of animals, here's Roscoe.
Oh my God, I love that.
Roscoe wants to say hello.
He's a male?
Yes.
How old?
He's about 2 years old, I guess. I got him as a rescue. He was in a shelter.
So a film Dog War, but you have a cat.
Right. Well, I should also start out by saying that I don't come into films as an activist. Like, I don't start as an activist. If anything, I become an activist from the research and from the work itself. Right. And that's certainly true of one of my last films, Under Our Skin, which is about the Lyme disease epidemic. I didn't know much about it before I started the film, except that my twin sister had it and that she got really sick. But I thought it was kind of all in her head. Right. And then I got involved in the film, and the research and the data was like acid on my worldview. I mean, it completely changed it. And so then I became an activist. So I'm not an activist. I'm an artist and a filmmaker. But it's also really important that the art that I create makes a difference.
Right.
And so in the case of Dog War, someone actually came to me who had seen Under Our Skin and some other work that I had done, and told me about this issue. And once again, it was something that I didn't know much about at all. And
can I interrupt you
sure.
a second there? Because I was actually going to ask you that question. How, like, you know, you're an award-winning filmmaker, you have Oscar shortlisted and Emmy-nominated productions. I was like, how did you ever get involved with a film like Dog War? And I know you told me someone was instrumental in sharing that story with you. Are you able to say who it was, or?
Well, let me continue
Okay.
the story. No, I'd rather not give out names.
Okay.
Really, in any of this, in any of the discussion, especially since the film is not finished.
Right.
But someone came to me and told me about this issue, and just like with Lyme disease, this was something that I didn't know anything about, and I was shocked. And if I'm shocked, I take myself as sort of an example of what the public might feel, that the public would be shocked too.
Right.
And that's where I know that there's an important story, that needs to be told, and that people need to know about. So that's really what launched this. I didn't start as an activist. I didn't start as I think what's salient in all my work is that I care. I'm compassionate. I care about all beings, including human beings, animals. And
Well, some of your past productions are all obviously dealing with human issues.
yes.
And your films in general, they aim to educate and, you know, elevate people's minds and open their minds to things that they might not know about. But I'm curious, did she strictly talk about the dog meat farms in South Korea when she approached you, or did she talk about Yulin? Had you heard about Yulin Dog Meat Festival before?
No. As I said, I hadn't heard
Never
anything.
heard.
Nothing. I
Wow.
was shocked to hear that there was a dog meat trade. I was shocked to hear that it was an actual. I wasn't shocked to hear that people ate
Right.
dog, because I know that people eat all sorts of things.
Right.
But I was shocked that there was a trade, that there was a trade, and I was interested that there was a war going on between those who were trying to conserve the practice and those who were trying to stop it.
Right.
And so, there also is an evolution. As I got involved in it, I began to care more and see more, and so it is fair to say that I'm an activist now. I care. I want my film to make a difference.
Right.
And so to make a difference in people's hearts, primarily, and that it will be part of the change.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think I understand, because I'm an artist at heart myself, and we're often very sensitive people. So I guess that was a couple years ago that this lady came by, or lady or man, the person that was instrumental in planting that idea in your head. It was a couple years ago, or was it longer
That's
than
right.
that?
No, a few years ago.
And so from that moment on, you decided this was your new project and you took it on, or did you?
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
All right. Well, I did kind of touch upon that because I was curious. You live in California, right?
Yes.
You must have heard of Mark Ching. I mean,
I had not heard of Mark Ching. No, I'm telling you, I knew nothing about this. No, I
okay.
didn't.
I guess it's only people that are really involved with animal rights that would really glance upon that stuff. You know, like it depends on what you look like. what you look at YouTube on YouTube will determine what they suggest, right? So I'm an animal lover, but I've not always been like you. I don't really consider myself an activist myself, but I'm definitely an animal advocate. I do take part in some protests and that sort of thing because I feel animals are very unjustly treated and there's so much to be done still for animals. So I do take part in that, but like you, I don't necessarily consider myself an activist. But I had heard about Ching, and that was the first time I heard about the dog meat trade was through Yulin. And at the time, I thought it was only a once a year festival, but as it turns out, it's a day-to-day occurrence. It takes the lives of millions of dogs and cats in China. And on that front, I think you're able to say in South Korea, it's mostly dogs. They don't slaughter cats in the same way they do dogs.
Not on an industrial level, no.
Right. Okay. Well, not in the same way. So speaking of dog war, I would like for you to tell us, the viewers, what to expect. What is the story about? What's the synopsis? Who are the protagonists in your film? And what do you hope to achieve with the film?
Okay, well, let me backtrack a little bit because you asked me about me as a person, and you asked me about what made me interested, and sort of a little bit of the evolution. Is that I was a vegetarian when I was 17, and this was a long time ago before people.
You won't say how long ago?
Over 30 years ago. And
what made you become vegetarian?
okay, I was at a mall in New Jersey.
Right.
And it must have been like a Greek grill or hero stand. They have the slab of meat on the stool.
Yeah.
And they sliced it off for the heroes. And I looked at that and I was disgusted, and I just said, I'm not going to eat meat again.
That was.
Yeah. So it was visceral. It 17 years, and I stopped being a vegetarian only because I wanted to, or believed I needed the grounding energy of meat.
Right.
That I needed to balance the yin with a little more yang, put it that way. And that somehow it felt like if I wasn't involved in the cycle, somehow it felt like I had extracted myself from the cycle of life and death, and that if I didn't kill, I would be killed. It was something like that. But it was medicine. Like it was medicine for me. It was not. It was not something I wasn't craving it or anything. And
when did you stop being vegetarian? At what age?
34.
Okay, so
34,
you were a vegetarian
35.
for a long time.
Yeah. So for 17 years. I started when I was 17, then it was for 17 years. And it was this project that brought me back to being a vegetarian.
Oh,
so,
wow.
I couldn't, people say, well, there's a difference between dogs and cows, and while I truly do believe that, and we can get back to that, I want to get back to that issue, and I'm sure you're going to ask me that. I feel like living is the extent to which we close our eyes, and that we close our eyes to suffering around us in general. And I don't need to close my eyes to the suffering of animals in general, whether it's dogs or cows.
Right.
Even knowing that there is a difference. So I just felt to be more in alignment with myself and my values, and the project that I was working on, that I wanted to be a vegetarian again.
Well, congratulations on that decision. I personally am vegan. But it's only been a couple years, and what brought me back to becoming vegan again, because I first became vegan, you were at 17, I became vegan full-fledged, overnight, drastic, black or white, at age 15. And I can credit my friend at the time, my best friend, her sister was part of PETA, and she brought home a video, like we would see each other on the weekend. She brought a VHS tape. We're talking about many years ago. So she brought home a VHS tape and we watched it. She said, my sister says we should watch this. And it was slaughterhouse footage. And honestly, 5 minutes of that was enough. I was disgusted. I couldn't believe that I was eating this my whole life up until then. I was a little bit angry at my parents because it was like, I never chose to do that. Like, I had no idea. No one ever told me this is how it's produced. You don't think about it, you know? You think your parents do the best, and they do. You know, my parents, God bless them, they were well-intentioned, but it really shocked me. And right then and there, I became vegan. And then, you know, at age 15, being vegan, and my mom didn't know what to do, so I was feeding myself, I was preparing my own meals. Long story short, I became sick. After 3.5, 4 years of eating rice and vegetables, I became sick. I was very grossly undernourished. I became dangerously anemic. And at that point, I started including eggs at the recommendation of my doctor and my mom. So from that moment on, I started including eggs. I felt so much better. And, you know, back then, there was not the wealth of information there is today. So I thought, well, I guess I need eggs, you know. And later on, I did include fish too. So that was my history. And then what made me go back to being vegan was 2 years ago when I found out about the Yulin Dog Meat Festival. And I started researching and I saw the images, and I saw a lot of debates online and vegans saying, well, you don't have the right to, you know, be angry at the dog meat festival when you're eating beef, you know, like, so I understood a little bit of that rationale, but so
Well, let me just
yeah,
address that, because it's, for me, it's very clear. The difference between eating a dog and eating a farm animal like cows that we eat
right,
in the West, is that we human beings raised dogs over hundreds and hundreds of years. We domesticated them
right,
to trust us and to be what we know of now as man's best friend.
yes,
And so it's a breach of trust. That for me is the major issue.
yeah,
These are not wild animals. They have not been bred through the years to be livestock.
no,
We have bred them to be friends of ours. And you see, when you go out to these farms, these dogs that only have known
suffer,
suffering and imprisonment their whole lives, still want to play, are still
oh my
still
God,
curious, still want touch. I mean, some are completely traumatized,
yeah,
and that's another story, but it's in their DNA. So
yeah.
there's no such thing as a meat dog. There's just no such thing.
There should not be, you know, it should not be. I agree with
And
you.
in Korea and in other places, there is a distinction between a pet dog and a meat dog,
Yeah.
and it's just it's a false distinction.
And that's been happening for years and years and years, thousands of years, I suppose. But, you know, just to finish up on that, like, I do agree with you that people that are, you know, objecting to this dog meat trade, they're entitled, whether they eat meat or not. Anyone with a heart and a soul, in my opinion, would be outraged. It's horrible. It's also the deliberate torture aspect of the trade that's very disturbing. I know farm animals suffer, of course they do, and I've seen footage, and it's appalling as well. But it's not like the farmers deliberately beat the dog. They put a blowtorch in the cow's mouth. It's not the same extent of torture. So for me, I agree with you. Everyone should be against this, and hopefully we'll make some headway. And your film will go a long way into exposing it to the masses. And on that note, well, so let's talk about this film of yours and how you started working on it 2 years ago. Did you have an idea what you're gonna do, what angle you were gonna tackle?
No, and that's the thing. I mean, how do you make a film about an issue and a controversial issue that doesn't just come off as as activist or apologist or um, polemical, that isn't just, and it's not just going to preach to the converted. How do you make something that is accessible to everyone,
Right.
that has some entertainment value, that isn't just preachy?
Yes.
Because those films don't get seen except by the people in their own community.
Right.
And that's what Under Our Skin was able to break out of its relatively small world and community and speak to a very large audience.
Right.
And so that's important to me. And that's one distinction in not considering myself an activist. Because if I just consider myself an activist, then that is going to be informing what I do.
Right.
And I'm not going to be I'm not going to bring in other voices. I'm going to vilify. I'm going to make it black and white.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in nuance. I'm interested in the complexity. I'm interested in the difficulty, and the challenges. And I don't want to make a film that just makes the people on the other side, the dog meat trade side, just as villains. And I know there's a lot of people in the community, in the animal rights community, and especially in the dog meat trade community of activists that do that, that want to do that, that use expletives about them, that want to do to them what they do to animals. And I don't want to get on that bandwagon. I want us, because we all need to try to understand a little bit of the other side. Now, having said that, in doing that, rather, we're going to be able to get a lot more ears and eyes, because we're not coming at it by telling people you're wrong. That's
You're
the
evil.
first thing that's going to alienate people.
Pointing fingers, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to open up the net. I want to make it a little more, difficult to grapple with what we're dealing with. And it is, we're dealing with people's livelihoods. Nobody wants to hear that what they've been doing for their whole life and generations is wrong and is morally wrong.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear that, even if it's true.
Right.
Okay, so we need to find another way to get people in, and one of the best ways to do that is through filmmaking.
Right.
And in telling a story, telling an interesting story. So that was the challenge. The angle that we're using, that we're coming at it with, is by following a couple of American former special ops
just a couple?
soldiers, I guess you could say.
You said a couple, but it's more than two, I imagine.
Well, the people that are in the film, the people that show up in the film are just two.
Okay.
They have an organization though.
Right.
And so I found that immediately interesting, that these men who are trained in war and killing, secretive operations, are doing everything they can, risking everything to save dogs' lives. And so that I love that juxtaposition.
How did you get to hear about them, though?
Again, it was through word of mouth, through through the community, through the people who've been helpful in getting this film going.
Early on, you knew these were going to be the two protagonists of your film. Like you were going to focus on their work, the work they're doing over there. But we have to say they're former special ops vets, right? So they're retired, I guess, at this point.
Correct.
Yes. And so that is really, for me, it's a bit jaunting because you're like, he's already been through war, like a lot of very disturbing trauma, I imagine, going to war. And then you have the opportunity to take a step back and relax and enjoy your life a little bit more. And they chose to take this on. I wonder, can you tell us how they came to learn about the issue? And
I can't tell you that. You'll have to wait for the film for that. I don't think
you're not going to
but I can tell you that there's a very strong bond in general between soldiers and dogs.
Yes.
And that played a part in it. In this particular situation, there was a bond forever between them and the dogs, between them and dogs.
Like police too, you know.
Yeah, and in this case, I think it's fair. I know it's fair to say that they've learned to love dogs more than people. And
I do agree with that.
I think there's a lot of people in the animal rights world who would agree with that. I'm not going there yet myself.
You're staying a
I'm
little
holding out some,
right.
some little bit of hope for humanity.
Right.
But that's the story. That's really the story, or the angle.
So you started shooting when exactly? You had to kind of have an idea what you're gonna do. You get a plan. You hear about these special ops. When do you fly out to Korea, South Korea?
It was over 2 years ago, 2+ years ago, the first time we went out. Yeah.
Okay, so early on, you take a project on and you're like you go with it, eh? You don't waste any time.
Yes, but as long as there's funding, I mean that's the other variable. If there's not funding, then a project doesn't move forward. And we've been lucky to have a number of small donations and a few larger donations to keep us going.
Right.
Without that, we couldn't. And we're still, although we're editing right now and getting close to a rough cut, which is exciting. It's happening right behind me.
Oh wow! Oh my God! That's pretty cool.
We still need to raise funds to finish, and I think there's a perception in the activist world. Because there's so many videos. And they just think of this as just one more video. But this is a film. It's not a video.
A different budget.
Yes, it's not something we just post on YouTube and that's it. We take this, we bring it to the world, we bring it to as large of a platform as possible, to get as wide of an audience as possible, and then stay involved in the distribution and outreach phase. To create partnerships with other organizations. That's part of what we do at Open Eye Pictures and what I've done with all of my films.
Right.
So that it doesn't stop with the end of the film. That the movie can really be part of a movement and can help make a movement.
Well, hopefully it won't be the last feature film on the subject. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the cost of production, because a lot of us out there, including me, we're very ignorant on the magnitude of funds that are needed to make a film of this caliber. So we can discuss that later. But before I move on, are any chance you would, now that you've done this film, Dog War, you're almost done with it?
I don't want to say almost done, because that's an expectation.
Many months away, or are we talking about a year?
We're talking about 2020.
Oh, okay, for sure. I imagine that much.
but not early 2020.
Okay. Now, like a lot of us, like me, started to hear about the dog meat trade through Yulin. would you be inspired to do a movie like that, depicting the Yulin Dog Meat Festival in China?
Yeah, well, I did approach Mark Ching,
Oh, so
and
you know him now.
what's that?
You know of him now.
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, I know everything by now, or
Yeah.
almost everything.
Now you're very
Um,
knowledgeable.
but he wasn't interested. I would have liked, ideally, for this to be for Dog War to be maybe Dog Wars, and to
Yeah,
cover
like a
what's
series.
happening in China, to uncover what's happening in Indonesia,
Mm,
maybe Vietnam. I mean,
Cambodia.
and follow other dog warriors, besides just the ones that we're following. But we don't have the budget for that. That would
Oh,
be I mean, that would be a scale that, much larger than what we have right now. And so it's a choice. You always have to narrow down. And the idea is that any story, any film, that it needs to be a microcosm of the larger issue. And
yeah.
this certainly is. So while it's about South Korea, it's not just South Korea, and we'll make that very clear that it's
Mm,
happening in many other places.
right.
But it's a way in, and in looking at like I said, the microcosm, the smaller story, we get an idea of the universal story. So I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I don't, especially if you're not an activist, and a lot of activists will say, you need to tell my story. You
Right.
need to follow Yulin. That's what's really bad. There's more animals killed in China than in South Korea.
I don't know if that's true, but yeah, like some people are, they want to, like tackle what's personal to them. But no, I was just asking out of curiosity because it probably opens your activist, a little bit of the activist in you, and maybe you'll consider doing other animal rights
Yeah.
issues.
Well, it's not that it opened up the activist in me, it's opened up the storyteller in me,
Yeah.
because there are other important stories that need to be told that are, like, what's been happening in Yulin is one. But I've made peace with that. I'm
Well,
okay
you
with
can't
telling this story
yeah, like one
and doing
production
it
can't
well.
do everything, absolutely not. But South Korea, from what I've heard, they're doing much better than other countries. HSI has certainly been successful at closing down a lot of dog meat farms and other, obviously,
Well, I want to
activists.
just jump in there and
Yes.
say I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
And um, some of my sources would
Right.
say that HSI is not really, they're not shutting anybody down. HSI is maybe trying to claim that, or putting that out in the press, or getting on board as meat markets are closing, or as farms are closing. But
Right.
I really want to. I mean, if I've gotten to know the culture of the competing organizations of the and it's
And can you
it's
name
deep and it's complex.
can you
And
name some of
I
these
think it's really
organizations?
unfair to give credit
Right.
to a large, very large international organization like HSI that has resources to create powerful media campaigns, PR campaigns that other groups don't, that are just as instrumental and at times more instrumental in doing the work on the ground.
Well, can you talk about those organizations that you feel are doing the actual work? I mean,
I, I, I can't, because I'm I
we
don't
know
want to, I
about
just don't
them.
want to start naming names. There are several Korean organizations
Well, we know them.
that are doing fantastic work,
Right.
and everybody has their own loyalty. Um, and if I name one and not another, then that's going to be a problem. I want to stay out of the politics completely.
Right.
But I just want to, but throw in there, there's an asterisk when you say HSI has been instrumental in closing down Korean dog markets. That's not necessarily true, and it's not necessarily fair to all the activists on the ground who are doing the day-to-day work.
Okay, well, I didn't really mention instrumental, but I said, they've been helping close down some dog meat farms. I personally have volunteered with HSI. They brought back about 45 dogs from South Korea. If the groundwork was done by another organization, they kind of corroborated with them. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. The point is, they're wonderful employees at HSI Canada. I can speak volumes about them.
Yeah, I did not mean to attack HSI.
No,
I
but
just, this is
I
not,
can say that I just want to throw it out there because you said your piece, but I want to say that, an organization like HSI is huge. And every office everywhere around the world has their own employees, their own staff, and we all love animals and we have their best interests at heart. I know the team here in Montreal, they're doing amazing work and their hearts are in it. And I've seen it firsthand. I've been part of it. And actually, they are going to bring back some dogs in the fall of 2019. And I'm hoping I'll volunteer once more. Okay, enough about that. We're not going to name, but many people know the activist community who will be watching this podcast are well aware there's Save Korean Dogs. There are a multitude of organizations out there that are doing tremendous work. It's definitely not just HSI, so we know that. So at this point, I guess I wanted to maybe talk a little bit more about, can you give us any impressions when you went to film in South Korea? You must have seen some of the footage that was being shot. You must have seen firsthand these dogs and the conditions they live in. And how was your reaction? Like, how do you react to that? Because you've never seen it before. Like, it's one thing seeing it on a screen on a computer, and it's another thing being there and witnessing it firsthand.
Right.
So how did that make you feel?
Awful on one hand, but on the other hand, the camera is a way for me to protect myself from the rawness that I might not be able to protect myself from otherwise. For example, for another film, I filmed a brain surgery. Now, I'm one of those people who faints when they give blood. I am not. I could not be a doctor. I could definitely not be a surgeon. But I was able to film that brain surgery with, fully seeing the whole brain exposed, because I was behind the camera.
So it helps protect you, yeah.
It helps protect me in the way that I see things differently. I see things as I go into my artist mind, and I have to, to some extent, pull myself out of the ordinary way of seeing.
Right.
So if I didn't have the camera, I couldn't do it for very long. And that's why the people who have been doing it for long, a lot of the people really are traumatized in a lot of ways. Like they have recurring dreams, anxiety. I mean, it's rough. It's really rough. It's rough being there with a camera, but the camera does help keep a certain distance.
Well, I can relate to that because just sometimes when you feel a little bit more fragile, let's say, you wear a pair of glasses or shades, and that helps protect you. It creates a layer between you and the rest of the world. But also, I would think that maybe the fact that you're behind a camera, you're more focused on your role of storytelling and exposing this matter to the world, and that makes you feel like, okay, there's a purpose. It's not like just me watching horrible cruelty. It's going somewhere. Like there's a point to this.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, and also the camera is both something that projects and receives at the same time.
Right.
And it's receiving the light. Now, usually we're just receiving it through the lens of our eyes, and
Right.
it's landing in our soul. And in this case, the repository is the camera, is the sensors of the camera.
Mm.
And I look at that as almost like a data bank, um, um, a brain bank, a heart bank, that that is holding this reality, and that's what makes it more precious, and that's also what makes it more important as something that truly can express the rawness of it, the reality of it, in a way that my own words can't. I mean, that's why I use a camera, because it has the potential, the fullness, and the potential to really tell a story
Right.
that might be too raw or too difficult to do without that mediating device.
And how long have you been shooting in South Korea? Like your first trip, how long did you stay? And it's been multiple trips, I imagine.
Yeah, there's been I think it's been four or five trips, and usually it's from 5 days to 8 days.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Very condensed.
yeah, yeah.
For budget reasons.
For budget reasons. I mean, I would love to stay there longer and do more and open up the film in a lot of different ways. But we're doing as much as we can with as little as we have, and that little is going a long way.
And how large of a crew do you travel with? It's yourself and
Well, it's been our crew has been two people,
okay.
myself as director and cinematographer. I mean, it's fortunate that I happen to also be a cinematographer instead of just a director. So myself and one other person who does sound and
Okay.
helps with
Sound.
meaning lighting and assisting in other ways. And then we always have worked with a, a translator
All
from
right.
Korea who's helped us and can help with other production assistant kinds of things.
And where are you shooting the film? Like it's mostly located where exactly?
It's Seoul, outside Seoul,
Okay.
um, um, sometimes a couple hours from Seoul, but it's pretty much mostly been in that general area.
And could you tell us, like, while you're filming there, obviously you're focused on the work, but I'm sure you got to interact with some locals and get a better feeling of what's the attitude in South Korea. Like you said, it's a war between people that are opposing this and the
Well,
people
this
that are
is,
making money.
yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that is important to say is this is not just, it's not just an outside concern. A lot of people say, well, what business do you as Americans have going into Korea and telling them what they should be doing? What business do American Army vets have going in and telling them what they should do? And that's the case is that this is a war that's going on in Korea itself. That
Hmm.
there's a big schism right now within Korea in a lot of ways. It's a generational schism.
Right.
South Korea has exploded in the past 30 years. It's not the same Korea that where dog meat eating culture was rooted in tradition.
Right.
Um, and younger people who had other influences are saying it's wrong. And so there's really a deep divide. And so that deep divide between the animal rights and dog meat trade reflects a larger division within Korea itself between the young and the old, or the new, or the modern and the old. It's and to me, that's one of the things that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
It's not just about dog meat.
Mm. Well, so it's, in your opinion, it's generational issue. You feel like as the older generation dies off, like the young generation, they're more exposed and they have obviously more influence from the Western culture, and they know that dogs and cats are known as companion animals in most of the world. So do you feel like that will slowly help progressively die off the industry, or?
Well, absolutely. I mean, even the people within the industry itself say that that's going to happen. I mean, they know it's inevitable,
Right.
but they don't want it to happen. They don't want it to be foisted upon them.
Okay.
And that's why they're fighting tooth and nail. But it is something that I think is inevitable in South Korea, that practice will die off. Most people don't eat dog meat,
Yeah.
and so I'd say a large majority don't eat dog meat, but they also don't want to dictate that
Okay.
on other people. And there's also a strong sense of respect from the younger generation toward the older generation, which is part of that culture,
Right.
and part of many other cultures, unlike American culture.
Yep.
Um, Something we probably could learn from,
Of
but
course.
they're so they also just see this as respect for the older ways. So it's while on one hand it's not supported, there's not a really strong pushback, or it's not as strong as it could be if it weren't for that cultural trait.
Right. But for me and for many that are against this, and I'm sure the young people in South Korea as well, it's the torture aspect. And can you speak about that? Like, have you formed an opinion as to why they feel the need to torture the dogs before slaughter? What is the belief behind that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that's not always the case.
Okay.
I know that it's a talking
Huge sigh of
point.
relief.
It is a talking point, and it is true to a certain extent, but it's not true on, like, if you're talking about large scale farming. They're not going to take the time to, like, torture a dog, every single dog.
Okay.
That's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. But on smaller farms, on a smaller scale, it does happen. And I've talked to a lot of people who remember when they were young,
Right.
and they remember hearing the screams of the dog that was hanging on a tree, that was being beaten. So it does happen, and it is part of a tradition. And part of the belief is that the more the dog suffers, that the better its meat is going to taste. The more that it will increase stamina in the person who eats it, in the man that eats it,
Yes.
primarily.
Well, that's a lot.
And that stamina basically, as you know, means sexual virility for the most part.
They could take Viagra, but I guess they're traditional. But yes, I've heard of that. But as far as I know, the problem with the dog meat farms is the way they're, like, raised. It's just horrible conditions. They're in wire cages on slabs of concrete, the dogs. They're exposed to the elements. So if it's minus 40, that's how the dog is feeling it. There's no water. They're fed garbage waste. And most of these dogs don't even make it. And the beating,
Yeah.
well, a lot of the dogs don't survive those conditions. It's horrible. And so what I heard is that the beating actually happens when they transport the dogs to the markets. And at that point, while they're crammed in little cages on the trucks, and by the time they get to the market, that's where they might just beat them, or, it's not the same as China. Every country has their own specific cruelty, but this is what I've heard, and it's been kind of documented. So I believe there is some deliberate torture, but it's not the same as China. China is more strays, and they deliberately do torture dogs, especially during the annual Yulin Dog Meat Festival, and they seem to rejoice in it, which is what makes us so.
Yeah, I don't know how much they're rejoicing in it because they rejoice in it, or because they're rejoicing in it because they're opposing. They want to. They want to. It's just like it's their
It's like
battle
lashing
cry.
out, lashing out.
That it's so. But there are texts. There are old texts, medical texts, in Korea that talk about the benefits of eating dog and the benefits of beating a dog, so that it's and so that its blood does not escape. That it's that there's an importance to the blood. It can't desanguinate.
Oh, okay.
So and we'll be we have
And the
that will
film,
be in the
it does
film.
cover that. Oh,
So
okay.
we're putting this in context, cultural context as
Right.
well, and it's not something. But you can't just like say, oh well, there is a history, there is a written history, therefore it's okay.
No,
I mean, we have written history of slavery. We don't say that's
exactly.
okay.
Exactly. As the culture evolves, hopefully, I'm looking at the time. I know we're going to have to cut it soon. So before we do that, I just had a few questions I wanted to bring about. First of all, you've been shooting in 2018 in South Korea. So I was wondering if you became aware of the Last Chance for Animals. They hosted the world's largest protest against the dog meat trade, and on July 17th, 2018, has been, seen everywhere. Certainly on Facebook, we've seen it, YouTube. It was a beautiful event, in my opinion. Did you manage to maybe
The one
cover?
in Seoul, in
I believe it was in Seoul. I'm
in
not exactly
Korea,
sure.
in Korea.
July 17th, 2018, they
Okay.
hosted that protest. It's LCA.
Yeah. So okay. First of all, I want to say you refer to what we do as shooting. I like to say filming,
Filming, sorry.
because I like to, and it's not it's something that I want to speak to the audience, not to you personally about. It's just that um, that's my approach. I'm not shooting anything. I find that as violent, as having a gun or
Okay.
hurting.
You don't like the analogy.
The violence that's inherent in that word is something that I don't support. So I'm filming. I don't know how large that event was. I wasn't there. And
My
I
question
believe
was
there's,
if
what's
it
that?
was covered in your film. That was the only question.
Oh, no, it's not covered in the
Okay.
film. There've been a lot of protests in Korea that
Right.
were very large, um, that, that were homegrown. So that didn't get the kind of press that something like that does, because there's a famous actress
Yes. Well, I
yeah,
guess you heard about it.
yes.
Okay, so before we wrap it up, I wanted to talk a little bit about the cost of production of the film. So you said you started this venture like 2 years ago, and you're not quite done, and there's funding needed. So for people like us, average folk that don't know how much it costs to make a film like yours, can you give us an idea of budget? What kind of budget do you need, and like?
Yeah, well, a typical hour-long film, 50 to 80-minute film, in my world, in professional filmmaking, costs from I'd say 400,000 to 1.5 million. So
Easily.
this film will not reach that height nearly, and it's been supported by a lot of um, it's been a labor of love, put it that way. Um,
Yes.
and so there's been a lot of work that hasn't been directly paid for. So the budget is much lower, but we
Okay.
still have costs that have to be paid for
Right.
finishing a film, editing, to editor work, color correction, sound mix, music composition or music rights. There's a lot that needs to be done, and so we're talking about a budget of all in all, from beginning to end of several $100,000.
And
And
where are you at in the funding? Like at this point, is it mostly raised through crowdfunding or?
no. Although we are doing another crowdfunding push
Right.
soon to try to get our completion funds,
Mm-hmm.
and that will probably happen this fall. It will
Okay.
happen this fall in the next. I don't know when this is going to come out, but in the next several weeks, let's say. And we want to sort of stop asking. People have given 2 years ago, and they're saying, "Wait, well, where's the film I gave 2 years ago?" And
Yeah, well, that's it. They
yeah,
don't understand the magnitude of the funds needed, I guess. Like you give $100 here and you're like, yeah, well, that's nice, but we need like 100,000.
right.
So at this point, how far away are you from your funding target to finish the film? Because we all want that film to be seen, right? So we want it to be done and released.
Yeah.
So what would you say?
I'd say we're about $100,000, 100,000 away.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. And
which
what are the plans for that? Like another round of crowdfunding?
another round of crowdfunding. We have a donor who says that they'll match funds.
Oh,
So let's say we got 50,000. That might mean that we get 100,000. So
wow.
um, that will be part of the campaign as we put it out. We'll explain everything, but I'm seeing the end. I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Put it that way. And we're getting very close, and with a little more work and a little more fundraising, we'll get there.
And so I guess the release date is sometime in 2020, you imagine? Like that's the expected release date? And is your film going to be released worldwide? How does it work? Like, I don't even know. Like, does it
Well,
premiere
we
in the
don't know.
US?
We're not. If this is an independent project,
Okay.
and usually what happens is at some point we whether it's a film festival, it gets into let's say a major film festival, or some kind of platform like Netflix or HBO or Hulu that
Right.
takes an interest and they use it. Then that's the platform. So I can't say what the platform will be right
Okay.
now. But yes, it'll certainly be worldwide as much as possible, and we're using all our resources to try to make the film as accessible as possible worldwide, and to be able to make a difference on that large of a scale.
Well, I think that just about does it. That's all the time we have with you today. I know how busy you are, so I thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to me. And the podcast will be launched in October sometime, so we'll coordinate and we'll have, I'm sure, a lot of listeners out there that are going to be excited at hearing about this film and what we covered. Of course, we could talk another hour, I'm sure, to uncover all of it.
Well, if you
But
have any burning question, then please feel free to ask before
right.
finish.
Well, at this point, I would just say I think listeners out there, we're going to post some links down below. And, obviously, funding is a big requirement of this film. And I think it being the first feature film on the subject, we all wanted to see it released and reach as wide of an audience as possible. I think it'll make a huge impact. It will help, hopefully, create some resolutions and hopefully bring about the end of this horrific dog meat trade. So you've been instrumental in that, and I thank you so much for your very generous time. So,
Thank you. And let me just say that our website is dogwarfilm.com.
yes. Yes.
And the funding, the crowdfunding site right now is savethedogsfilm.com.
Oh, okay.
So both of those will get you to where you need to go.
Yes.
And so
Well,
I just want
also,
everybody to know where they can go to get more information.
Also, they can visit your website, Open Eye Pictures, and take a look at all the other productions you've done in the past, and they're all very meaningful productions. So, I applaud you for that. So thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you for your work.
We'll
and your
be in
time.
touch.
Okay.
We'll get it done.
All right.
Okay, have a good night.
Okay,
Bye.
take care. Bye-bye.